Awesome. Kristi, we are so excited to have you on the Ops Drop today. For those of you who aren't aware, somehow, Kristi is the customer success leader. She has been in customer success for over 12 years now, leading teams at companies like Better Cloud and Sisense. She has consulted with many startups and corporate companies, and generally is just out there helping folks in customer success build their skills. And Kristi, you have amassed a really impressive following of about 50,000 people on LinkedIn. I see you dropping tons of incredible content, so excited to get into it. But yeah, first and foremost, welcome to the Ops Drop.
I'm excited to be here. I'm excited for our conversation, guys. I think we're gonna get into some really interesting things.
Yeah, same here. So, Kristi, one of the things that struck me when we first spoke was your point of view on how customer success leaders really rely on their own playbooks as the cornerstone of how they, come into companies and operate. And I know this is like the one thing that you really stand on is the anti-playbook methodology. So can you tell me a little bit about that point of view and sort of why you believe that they're often counterproductive?
So here's the thing, when it comes to playbooks, there's just not a one size fits all model, right? There's not even a one size fits most. I mean, honestly, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, every business, every product, every organization has some unique nuances to it that requires us to act and behave and to do things differently. Now, that's not to say that you can't find certain elements that are repeatable and things that are just fundamentally the right things to do. But when you over architect and over engineer these types of playbooks in an organization, you're taking away the power from your teams to do the things that they need to do and that they know are right in the moment supporting their customers. Because that's the reality, right? Even if you have a customer who's in the same journey stage as another customer, their needs might be different, right? Their circumstances are a little unique. And if we're too scripted and too beholden to things that we believe have to be done, we're going to make mistakes, right?
Right.
And so are we more focused on doing the tasks or achieving the objective? And I think that's what organizations fail to see. So for me, I'm overly indexing on the objective, right? So if we're trying to achieve a specific outcome, that's what playbooks are there for, right? Like they're helping us get to a goal. I'm more focused on the goal. And guess what? If my team can do 18 different things and still get us to the same goal, that is the thing I'm measuring. And so I think this is where organizations, they just fear deviation. And I think this comes down
Yeah.
to, thinking about the folks that you have on your teams and the resources. And so if you've got the right people with the right skills, or at least if you're training them and you're enabling them properly, they should feel like they can do the right things at the right time.
Kristi,
Totally.
I love it you said that. I have a quick question for you. Most people do like standardization based off of their ability to scale. How do you manage that level of customization and still be able to scale and handle the sheer number of different variations of how you'd handle your customers?
Because we're focused on milestones, right? There's certain specific things that would indicate to us that we're on the right track. And so instead of focusing on all of the tasks and activities that need to be done, I'm focusing on those key milestones, just leading indicators that will tell me, are we tracking this towards the right direction, right? Is this going to achieve that objective? And I think if you focus on those, that's where you start to give people more flexibility in between. But you still have the measurability of saying, did we get to these certain stages? Because we know that these are the things that if we're doing will lead us to X. So I think that's what folks need to focus on, as opposed to just, again, this checklist of things and saying, great, well, we did these 20 things. And so we're hoping that this objective is achieved. I'd rather focus on the like real leading indicators that say, if we see these behaviors, these outcomes, these actions from the customer side, that to us is an indication that we're tracking this in the right direction. And the problem is we over-index on tracking our internal team's behaviors and not our customers' behaviors. Because if I'm doing all the right things as the CSM, but my customer is not doing anything, is that successful? I've closed out a playbook or I've done the thing. It didn't drive any change for our customers. And so that's where organizations get it wrong. They're measuring the wrong things.
Yeah. And Kristi, to your point, something that I'm seeing more and more, at least over the past year or 2 years, is, in my opinion, we've slid a little bit backwards. I think at least, and I'm coming from mainly, as I started in go-to-market and got into product, but I'm seeing even product teams sort of backslide into, they were very outcome and objective focused and goal focused. And because of the anxiety that is sort of built up in tech, because we actually have interest rates, there's less VC cash, right? It's making people anxious, and when people are anxious, they tend to control their controllables, right? And they get output obsessed. And I'm curious to hear if you're seeing this in the customer success world as well, as like that sort of like backslide, that anxiety, that obsession with the outputs.
100%. I would say like 1000%. In fact, everyone's behaviors have shifted over the past couple years. And I won't even say the last year, last 2 years. Like, let's even just go back as early as COVID, right?
Yeah.
That was the
Yeah.
impetus of this big change. And you just saw a big behavioral shift in business. Then things got a little bit better and then they got worse again. And just there has been so much volatility over the past 4 years that behavior, like companies haven't been able to really control their destiny in terms of revenue outputs. And when you have that little control at driving the market and your performance as a business, again, to your point, you control what you can control. So we've over-indexed on the wrong things again. And it's honestly just driven from the top down because people want to see repeatability. We want to see like, okay, well, what is your team doing to get there? And honestly, it's kind of put a chokehold on everybody's ability to lean in and do the right things at the right time.
Yeah. How do you think we're gonna get out of that? Like, what is the
Oh, Mackenzie,
road
I don't
to
have a
fix
crystal ball here, but it's gonna be a little tricky. Listen, I think you need the right leaders in place. I mean, here's the thing, right? You have a strong leader who knows how to use data, who can articulate a narrative, who knows how to do pilots and to prove out concepts and things like that. You can speak from experience and kind of show people through storytelling, through information, and just get them bought in to why you're doing these things. Unfortunately, you've got some leaders who are just less experienced in kind of managing up and managing the business that way. And so when you've got the pressure coming top down of mandating certain things, it's hard to push back on that. And so when you're dealing with the pressure of boards, right? You've got your VCs or you got, a PE firm, which we all know all these behave very differently. You've got CEOs who are mandating certain activities. Sales are down. Where do you make up the revenue, right? So all of these factors are at play here. You have to be able to have the right leadership who can be cool, calm, and collected and understand, okay, great, something's not working. Let's pivot, let's change. But doing more of the same and expecting the same outcome, guys, we know what that is, right? And so unfortunately, that's the behavior model that we're seeing out there.
It's funny, Kristi. What I see is when a business is struggling with their ability to maintain revenue, they bring in like some new chief customer officer. They come in and they say, "Hey, I have this framework, and this is how we're going to solve your problem." That's why they hire people with a lot of experience, and they say, "Hey, this is how we're going to go through and do it." And there's a lot of pressure on those people coming into the business to be able to show some results. And so I think there's a little bit of a lean in on process to be able to say, this is like the playbook and how we're going to do it. How do you navigate the differences between coming in with a plan so that like the C-suite can have, I would say, just like confidence in like hiring you and you being able to come in and solve those problems, and then still having that transformative mindset of being focused on outcomes and not necessarily being tied to the playbook overall?
So you said something that I think is important. You said coming in with a plan. Everyone should come in with a plan, right? It's just you don't want to be overly prescriptive and come in with a playbook. And so I think that's the difference. You need to have a plan. You need to understand what it is that you have to do. Now what you have to do is figure out how do we get there? And every leader in every part of the business has certain levers that they can pull. And it's making sure that you understand what are the right ones to pull at the right time. But you have to do that with a real view of the business and understanding that nothing just falls in your purview, right? I know as a customer success leader, I'm a customer success leader second, I'm a business leader first, which means I have to understand the entire ecosystem of our organization and understanding what's working and what's not. Sometimes the things that are driving the outcomes from a revenue standpoint have nothing to do with my organization and everything to do with product or sales or marketing, right? And so I can't sit here and over-index on doing certain things. That's not going to change it because the things that aren't working are outside of my organization's control. So this is where I think business leaders need to come together And this is where that collaboration is so key. You have to be able to work together and understand where the gaps are, where the challenges are, and lean in collectively to fixing those instead of thinking that everything I have to fix is right here under my umbrella.
You
Yeah.
mentioned not having control of the product, and it resonated with me a little bit because when I see a business, the chief customer officer, they come in and they have a lot of stuff that they can impact through making sure like the usage is good, the NPS is good, CSAT's good, but there's a lot of times it's hinged on the product and issues within the product. How do you navigate making sure that you can support and impact the product team to be able to do what's needed to be able to impact the retention?
This is where information comes to play, right? Like as customer success professionals, either at the IC level, middle management, senior leadership, you have access to data and insights that no other part of the organization has. I know I will say they should have that information, but let's pretend they don't. In those cases, as a customer success leader, right, your job is to educate and enable your cross-functional peers. You need to fill the gaps in that information, and you need to be advocating for the changes that you need to see. Now, this doesn't mean you come in with a laundry list of things that they have to go do. This is where, again, the collaboration between leaders is so important, and being able to work together and also empathize and understand everyone has their own objectives. Everyone is working towards something. No one organization drives any specific list of things that we're all prioritizing. They have priorities, but how do we find balance as long as they understand, hey, look, there are certain things right now. Give them a list, give them something that's curated. I always say, like, here's 3 things. These 3 things are impacting X amount of revenue, have X amount of impact on however many logos that might be renewing in the next 6 months. If we can fix these things, it will not only help with retention and growth, it'll also even help sales, right? Because oftentimes what we see is that what customer success needs will often feed also what the sales team can then go sell and position as well. So if you're able to sell a story internally with customer information and actually customer situations and use cases, you'll help get that buy-in. But I'm also realistic, right? I know that my product team doesn't work for me. They're not building out every single thing that I need that my customers are asking for, nor do I want them to. My product team also needs to be innovative. They need to be driving us into the future. If we are only focused on the use cases in front of us today, we're not going to grow the way we need to long term. So this is where at least I understand, to the extent that I do, that there is a harmonizing balance that has to exist between the future state of your product and what your customers need today.
So you brought up something really interesting. When you think about the product team, they're not going to do everything you need to do. And when you're looking at the customer and you're looking to impact the retention, how do you navigate? What are some things that you've found that are effective in order to be able to keep the customers retained and happy when you can't meet some of the product deliverables that the customer is asking for, or that they may need to stay on the product?
Listen, Darren, at the end of the day, I believe in honesty and transparency and just overly communicating with customers. I'm not going to be able to deliver every single thing my customers want and have asked for. But if I understand the business impact to certain things and their organizations, it helps me tell a story, right? I've got customers who want certain things because it'll make their lives slightly easier. And then there's product gaps that are prohibitive. And my customer literally can't drive value from our solution because something doesn't exist or something isn't working as desired. It's being able to distinguish between the two. And so it's my job to be able to understand the impact to our customers so I can articulate that internally. So if it's big and it's broken and I got to go fix it, I'm going to prioritize it with my product team. But in the instances that my customer doesn't like the color blue and they wishes it was purple, or they wish the button was higher, or they had 3 less clicks, sorry, not sorry. Like, we're going to have an honest conversation about this and say, thank you so much for your feedback. I appreciate that. I want you to know that we did share this information internally, but that's not something we're prioritizing at the moment. Here are the things we are prioritizing. And you know what? Sometimes when you spin it that way and you actually show your customers what you are doing so that they can weigh that against what you're not, sometimes they're enamored by what you are innovating around and the other things that you are building. And they're like, oh, that's cool. Like, I actually need that too. So they start to deprioritize the things that they had once prioritized. At the end of the day, it's about communication, honesty, and transparency. And I've also had to say to my customers, I'm sorry, I'm not building this. And I know that this is something you need. Let's figure out a mutual path forward, right? You can either agree that we can make this work and here's some workarounds, or if this isn't going to solve what you need, I mean, that has to be an honest conversation. I don't believe that I should be trapping people into a solution that doesn't meet their needs. It's not going to help them be successful. That's just not how I work. And that's probably why I'm not a good salesperson.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And Kristi, what I've been hearing from you throughout this conversation is a lot about harmony, adaptability, and flexibility, right? And I think a lot of that usually comes from just building a lot of reps, right? Like you've been in this discipline, you've been leading teams in customer success for over a decade, right? So tell me a little bit about how you build a team culture that really empowers CSMs that might not have as many reps as you, so to speak, to sort of act without rigid rules while still, delivering results, right? Do you have a particular approach to change management or, training, something that is shifting the behaviors? Because I can't imagine that you walk into an organization that is like perfectly primed for Kristi mode, right?
Oh gosh, no.
So,
No, so a lot of what we have to do is really focused again on articulating the goals for your teams, right? If people are very clear on what they're working towards, you'd be amazed how creative they can get in actually achieving that. And so for me, the big thing that I'm always starting with is, does everyone understand our clear goals, right? And do they understand the work that they're required to do to help us get there? I think
yeah,
just laying that foundation for folks helps a lot. I don't believe that a lot of organizations are so clear and so methodical about communicating the clear objectives around things and the impact your team drives to support that. Now, the other thing I do is I make sure that I do a skill assessment. I have to understand where everyone is in their own professional journey. Because to your point, right? Yes, I've been doing this a long time. But I have some people on my team, maybe not as seasoned, not as experienced, others that maybe are more, and I can't treat them all the same, right? So I have to be able to understand where they're all starting from to offer some level of autonomy, but then also figure out where I need to be coaching and leaning in. And this is where I think good managers will take the time to really understand that and understand there isn't a blanket way to manage everybody. Everyone has different needs, everyone has different skills. And so, yes, we can focus on upskilling in different areas, but no two people need the same thing at the same time. So the other thing is just really assessing who has what skills, what are the gaps, because those gaps I'm going to pay attention to. If I know someone is not really strong in commercial conversations, that's where I'm going to lean in, right? And I'm a big believer and I like to lead from the front. So if I've got folks who haven't done certain things before, I'm going to jump on calls with them. I'm going to lead out and I'm going to do it. And I want them to see how it's done, or at least how I would expect it to be done, right? Of course, I'm not perfect. I don't do everything right, but give them an example by which they can learn from. I don't actually believe that everything that teams can learn, they're going to learn from taking an online course or
right,
reading in a book. That's just not reality. Those things help set foundational knowledge, but until you do it, you don't know.
right.
So you have to see it. So I'm a big believer in just kind of like pull the team along and lean in where it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big teaching philosophy, right? The I do, we do, you do. And I haven't seen many uh leaders as of recent, and I think it's because of the anxiety right now, showing their teams what good looks like. And I think it's because a lot of leaders that exist, and I'm speaking hyperbolically, but a lot of leaders that exist right now know how to operate in good times, right? Like the stretch of years that we had in tech where we had a lot of money and could be creative and do what we want to do. And a lot of those people don't know how to operate in what I like to call wartime, right? Where it's like, hey, I know it's crazy right now, but you still need to be out of your ivory tower and in the weeds with your team to help upskill them and train them. So I guess my question to you is, because there's so much more intensity, so much more noise, so much more pressure, like what would be your advice to a leader to get themselves out of the weeds and make sure that they are doing what you're doing and still showing their team what good looks like?
I mean, here's the thing. As a leader, we all have to learn how to be calm, cool, and collected. That doesn't mean I'm not crying behind closed doors at times. It means that as I'm working with my teams, though, I have to lead from the front, right? I have to set a good example for them. So the stress or the anxiety that I as a leader might be experiencing because I'm watching the numbers and I'm hearing, I'm in the tough meetings and I'm having those hard conversations. I don't want my teams exposed to that because I want them to be focused on what the good work looks like and making sure that they're feeling empowered to do that. It is hard. I mean, and like I said, I think it's about compartmentalizing and understanding what are the right conversations to have with the right audiences and what's the right work to do at the right time. I make sure that I am prioritizing a little bit of all of that all of the time, right? There's days in my week that I structure out time that I'm just focused on strategy and the business development and making sure that we are hitting targets and that we are headed in the right direction and I'm aligned with my leadership team. And there's other times like right now, recently I had a CSM leave. Guess who's the backfill right now? Me. You want to know why? Because I'm not going to go put all those extra customers on my team.
Yep.
They're already at a heightened state of stress and trying to do all the things that they can barely do with the resources they barely have. So for me, I like to set good examples and lead out and show them, hey, listen, I'm not above doing anything. I'll answer a support ticket. I'll get on a customer call. I'll go do a demo. Like, I can do it all. I have. And I want them to see that in these times, I'm with them. Okay. I'm not overseeing them. I'm not just here calling out demands and telling them what to do. I'm going to be by their side and making sure that we're getting through whatever tough time it is together. And we're going to figure it out and we're going to strategize together. And I pull them into processes and I pull them into the work that I'm doing. I believe that people want change to happen with them, not to them. Right. And so for me, it's also really big as we navigate these different times that my team feels like they're part of redesigning and pivoting the business in a way that's going to help drive those right outcomes. And we're doing it together.
Right.
I love what you said earlier around honesty and transparency. I think for me, there's core behaviors that function like with the leadership functions by, which is if you're honest and you're transparent with your team and with your customers, it builds a layer of trust. Like there's the book, The Advantage, written by Patrick Lencioni, talks about like the foundation being trust, and it really builds a really healthy organization. I think that transfers everything that we do internally at a business. I do believe transfers to the customer experience. So, if you feel like you're being honest and transparent with your team and they have those conversations with their customers, they have a much better experience with the customer engagement because they feel like they can be honest and transparent and they don't have to feel like they're hiding things. Are there any other management principles that you use outside of like being honest and transparent for like your foundational work with your team that helps you build a really happy and healthy team that then transfers into like servicing your customers in the most effective way?
I think to the extent that I can, I'm a people first leader, right? At the end of the day, my employees are all people. They have homes, they have families, they have priorities outside of this. They do not live to work, they work to live. And so I do believe that. So for me, it's about building relationships that actually scale beyond the professional setting that we're in. I want to know where they're spending their time and how they're spending time. I care about their kids and their family and their big milestones, and I want them to feel like they're celebrating that. Because when you build these human connections, you all operate from a different place of empathy. I never want my team to feel like I'm so out of touch with them and who they are and where they're coming from, because the more that I'm in tune with where they are in all spectrums of their life, I can then help them a bit better, right? How many people are going through tough times at home? I've had employees that are going through divorces or have had a loss of a child or things like that, like big, meaty things that are going on in their lives. And if all I ever cared about was our business metrics and getting the work done, man, I would tell myself to go screw myself and like I'd be out the door. And I don't want that. So for me, I think a big part of this change management culture starts with this people first mentality of building real relationships with folks so we can both understand where we're coming from. It also creates a safe place to be honest and to be transparent, right? How much easier is it to give feedback or to receive feedback when it's coming from a safe place? And so I think that creating a safe place for your employees to fail, to ask questions, to be vulnerable, to make mistakes, I think that also creates a culture of innovation and this momentum that allows you all to move forward in the right direction.
Yeah, 100%. I think that type of leadership is really what keeps businesses competitive. I'm curious, Kristi, I hear this a lot from you. I hear it from Darren. I've heard it from myself. We are all and have been people first leaders. Sometimes that comes with a cost, right? Because you're putting your team above yourself. And on top of it, as you've mentioned, right, there's more and more stress right now in tech because of our, macroeconomic situation. How, how do you handle all of that, right? Like you're putting your team first. Does that mean Kristi comes second? Like,
No. This is where prioritization is really important and creating boundaries is really important. One of my favorite things to do anytime I enter into an organization or even like at any point if something changes is creating a social contract. Now, what that means is how I'm communicating to my peers, my leaders, my team about what my boundaries are, how I'm going to work with them, right? All of the things that make us really collaborative and work well with one another. Now, I talk about this because it's important to understand that at the end of the day, guess what? my kid comes home, my husband and my daughter need to eat. Guess what? 5 o'clock, 5:30, maybe at latest, I'm stepping out of my office to go feed my family, to go have dinner. That is a non-negotiable for me. I do that every day. Okay. I will come back online if I need to, but I don't feel obligated to do that. I don't expect my team to feel obligated to do that. Now, here's the thing. There's rules and exceptions for everything. If we have a tight deadline, if there is something that's highly escalated, if there's something really critical or an exciting project or a launch, those are the exceptions and we lean into those. But when you make the exceptions the rule and you create a culture where everyone is working 24/7, that is where things fall. This is where the whole model breaks. So for me, it's very important that I create boundaries. Now, that helps me create priorities because once I've established that these are my boundaries, I can only do so much in the time that we have every day. So if I say, guess what? Every day I have one primary priority. There's only one. I can't have multiples or else they're not really priorities. So I have one key thing that I am intending to do every single day. My day can be complete if that one thing is done. Now, I'll allow myself to have maybe 2 more sub priorities that if I get to those, wow, the day was a real win for me. But guess what? I'm not trying to check off every single box of every single thing I need to do every single day. That list is infinite. The work never ends, it never stops. And so if we don't allow ourselves to stop, we won't.
Yeah. I think, Kristi, my question back to you, and I think that's an incredible system that you've built out. And usually incredible systems are, they have a history. So what happened before you built out this system? Like, was there ever a point where you really felt like hit a wall or, had to completely change up your system to, make sure that you had that prioritized time?
That is a really great question. And yes, I think early in my SaaS career, I knew no limits. And I thought that in order to show my organization that I was a top performer, that meant working 24/7. It
Mhm.
meant taking on stretch projects that I had no business taking on, doing work that really felt like it was violating my personal time and space and my health at times. And I did that for a long time. And I did that faced with many tears, many sleepless nights,
Yeah.
anxiety, stress. I mean, to the point where like my phone would ring and it'd be somebody from work and the anxiety that I would feel, I'd have a visceral reaction. I mean, it
Right.
was bad for years. And I just believed though that that was the work I needed to do. Do you want to know why? I kept getting promoted. Right.
Mhm.
So in that organization, and there was like a 5.5 year time span there, I was promoted 4 times.
Right.
So
Just continuous rewards for that behaviors.
I
Mhm.
was conditioned to believe that I had to sustain that in order to keep growing. And then I got to a point where it's like, you just can't sustain it anymore. Like, at what point is your mental health and your well being, like, what is the cost of that? And I started to think, right, I'm sure we'd all say, like, our health is priceless, our well being is priceless.
Yeah.
Nope, I very much had a price tag on it. It was my salary that was being deposited into my bank account every day. And so what I told myself is that that is what my health was worth. And when I looked at that number, I said, damn, that number's low for me to feel the way I'm feeling. And so I got to a place where I finally had hit a level of seniority where I felt empowered. I did go from CSM to VP in that kind of time span. And I looked around at my peers and I said, you know what? Nobody else here is doing what I'm doing. And that was a real wake up call for me. I was the hardest working person in that room. We're all sitting with the same titles, maybe some varying degrees of compensation, but fairly probably in the same realm of earnings. And I was the only one killing myself. And that's when I realized I was like, nope, never again. And I made a professional change. And once I changed organizations, it gave me the opportunity to reset
Right.
and say, this is what I will tolerate. And I made sure I communicated that in the interview process too. So it wasn't like hey, you guys bought a bill of goods, right? Like you thought something and now here I am day one, like
Yeah.
changing up on you. I made sure I was going to set the standard for my work style and my leadership style day zero. And if they wanted to continue me in the interview process, cool, that was on them, but they knew what they were getting. And I never wavered from that point.
It's interesting to me when you think about a smaller company and a CSM person comes into a smaller company. It could be their title is CSM. It could be that they are a VP of customer success. You mentioned prioritization being so critical in your ability to run a healthy organization. How if you were to give advice to like somebody coming into a smaller company and they were to say, hey, your CEO, your board is hitting you with a million priorities. You cannot figure out which way is up. What would you say the top 3 priorities should be for somebody coming in to that business?
I look at everything and I say, what of these things will have business impact tomorrow? And that's the lens in which I think of it through, right? Like because guess what? We're not promised 4 days from now. We're not even promised tomorrow. But if the one thing I can do today is going to have a material impact on the business tomorrow, and everything we do, every task, every activity can or should correlate back to business impact. I didn't say revenue impact, but business impact. And so for me, it was trying to score those and say, okay, well, great. If I do this today, this is what tomorrow will look like. And this is how tomorrow will be different. And so being able to just take that lens and say, okay, great, all the things that are in front of me, this is what I'm going to prioritize. But I will tell you the other flip side of that, my priorities didn't just exist on a piece of paper in front of me. I had to make sure I was communicating that out. So I let everybody else know, like, hey, guys, like my team meetings, I let my team know every week when we meet, these are my priorities for the week. This is what I'm focused on. If any of you have something that I need to prioritize, please make sure that I know as soon as possible, and we'll try to work it out so that way I can help you or at least give you context on where that falls within the work that I can do. I'm not just going to keep adding to my list, but I will work with them to figure out what works. So I think it's just a lot about that kind of communication and socializing those priorities out once you understand business impact.
Love that. If that person came into that organization and they weren't sure how to do that, what kind of questions could they ask the leadership team to help kind of fine tune what could have the biggest impact for the business at the current time with their objectives?
I'd probably start asking questions around like, okay, if I didn't do this, what would the impact be to the business, right? If we did this 3 months from now, how will that change things? I think it's just being able to understand what the patterns and the timelines would be to direct ultimately revenue, right? So it's like if the product team develops something today or they start working on something today, maybe 3 months it's built out. Now at that point I can start selling something, right? So like it's again that snowball effect. I have more time to sell it. I've got more revenue that can be generated as a result. If we decide to deprioritize that 3 months, I have that much less time to sell it, that much less revenue that we can generate from it. So it starts to be easier to understand like the business impact when you understand how businesses work. And I think that's where people really need to focus on their business acumen and understanding those elements, because that's where I think that rubber hits the road and you really start to figure out what your priorities need to be.
Yeah, that is 100% accurate. I think one of the best things that I did when I was earlier on in my career, when I was just a CSM, was I got obsessed with our BI tool, Looker, at the time. Learned everything about it, learned how to use it. And
Smart.
that was probably the smartest thing I ever did, was just get really, really familiar with the data. And I feel like that is very much the foundation of, as you're talking about, Kristi, building up that business acumen, right? And like if you marry that with sitting in on some leadership meetings to really hear what people are talking about, like what is ARR, what's MRR, what is the net retention rate, what's CSAT NPS, right? And you start familiarizing yourself with those terms and what the state of the business is, what the strategy is, like it's only upwards from there.
Absolutely. And I don't think that enough people spend the time to learn those things. There are people that are just unfamiliar with data and some that are just uncomfortable with it. I definitely fell in the uncomfortable bucket for a very long time. And I had to go through a forcing function to one, get comfortable with numbers. I'm not a numbers girly. I'm not math friendly, adjacent, anything. Like it's terrifying. I had to learn math and I had to learn data. And those two skills, while still not perfected by any means, I still use percentagecalculator.net. Just
Oh
to
my God.
Is that your favorite? Do you use it?
Of course.
It's my favorite. It's honestly,
That's
if somebody
incredible.
did something on my search history right now, that would be the #1 visited site throughout all my browsing history. Probably
I'm so
even more than like
thankful for
logging.
whoever built
Right.
that in, like 1996
I've been
or
using
whatever.
it since, I don't know, like it feels like over a decade. So it's like find the tools, make it easy. Like you don't need to have a PhD in math to figure out how to do your job. Use tools that are available to you, but you've got to understand what the numbers are telling you, and you have to know what the formulas are to get to that outcome, right? Because if you don't understand how to build to the numbers, you're never going to get there. So I love that you over-indexed in data, but that was definitely an area that was a challenge for me for a long time.
Yeah, totally. And just generally, I think for, leaders that have built that foundation, one thing, Kristi, that I'm hearing that you do that I really love is like, you never stop, joining customer calls and having those conversations, or just like being with your team, right? Being with your team in like a QBR and just hearing what's going on is like, you can have the data, you can have the business acumen, but really what rounds that out is, being in the room with your team and understanding what's going on with them and your customers. One question I wanted to ask you is, you've been in customer success for such a long time. You've seen it go through, uh, so many variations, and I'm interested to hear, especially from, the person's whose approach is no playbook, right? Like, if you could redesign customer success and how we approach it from scratch, what's sort of like the one philosophy or behavior or general way of working that you would get rid of?
Oh, that I would get rid of. Oh man. Well, I guess my philosophy on like I don't do things for the sake of doing them. So, I mean, here's one thing. EBRs, QBRs, you'll never see me do them. I think that they're a broken model. They came from consulting. They had very specific purpose in the consulting world. We took them over into customer success. I think at one point it made sense when you weren't engaging with customers often, and it gave you an opportunity to reset on the business. But let me just tell you something. What a waste of time. I was in a room with, I was presenting to a bunch of, it was a VC firm's portcos. I had all the CEOs and founders in a room. And I asked them, I said, how many of you ever attend an EBR or QBR for any of your vendors?
Mhm.
Guess how many raised their hand?
0.
Zero. Right. So
Yeah.
I said, shame on you for expecting your customers to do something that you won't even do
Mhm.
yourself. So things like that, right? I feel like we have become so enamored with doing things because they've been done a certain way for so long without real proof that those actually drive material impact, right? If I can't even tell you how many CSMs are having EBRs and QBRs out there with no E, right? The executive is not joining. They're getting on these very prescriptive meetings where they're just trying to get through the deck. I tell my team, I'm like, listen, if you ever get to a customer meeting with a presentation, I don't care if you spent 8 weeks building this thing out and you stay on slide one and have a very, very good, deep
Yep.
conversation, that to me is more valuable. So that's why I did away with them. Like, it's those types of things that I feel like as a practice, if we don't start to figure out what are the things that actually move the needle and matter to our customers and over index on those things and stop doing these things for the sake of doing them internally. So I would start there, but I'm telling you, there's a lot of practices across the board. Like, here's another one: arbitrary time to value with an onboarding program. Oh, you have to get them onboarded in 60 days. Why? My customer isn't in a place where that is a relatively like reasonable timeline for them. They have to go do this. They have to go that. They're
Right.
building their data. They're like, who am I to tell them? Let's work together with our customers and pull them into designing the program and the processes that make sense for them. Now, listen, at some point for scale, further down, yes, SMB, you've got a lower touch model, sure. Find repeatable things, but find ways to track the milestones that are important there, but you've got to figure it out. So I would actually just start to undo all of the things that have been woven into what customer success is and say that we have an opportunity to rethink it. And I would redesign everything actually customer first, because what we have designed is everything internally first.
I love that. You were talking about math earlier, and it made me think about when new products released and pricing, and how a customer success team can impact understanding what a customer is willing to pay for a product. Do you have any tried, true, tested methods for understanding your customer well enough to understand what that product should go for?
So, all right, listen, people don't love when I do this, but I like to test everything with my customers. Even before I roll out like a new process with my team, I test it with a couple customers. I say, hey, I've got a few ideas on things that I'd like to be building out. Can I get your feedback on it? I feel like pricing is similar. I would find a couple of our trusted customers and help them understand, like, what is the value worth, not the product, right? If I told you that you could save X amount of time, or that you could get this much visibility or drive this much revenue, what would you be willing to pay for that, right? Like, I feel like we don't ever lean into the opportunities to have those types of conversations. So we do things like, okay, we're going to take 5 customers and we're going to charge them A, and these customers we're going to charge them B, and then whoever buys more, like, that's the model. That to me is crazy. Like we just don't approach things philosophically the right way. Or the other one that I love so much, sarcastically, is when sales tells you, okay, no, well, this is the model that we've designed and this is the pricing and then that's it. I'm like, okay, that may work for net new customers because you're starting from a place of zero. But I can't go to my customer who's spending $1 today and ask them to spend $100 on something else as an add-on that now takes their contract from 5 to 500. Like that is not reasonable. So we need to be more thoughtful about like what the metrics actually are telling us and then pull our customers along for the journey.
Yeah. It's a very product-y approach, Kristi, is like, what is our, do the research, design it,
Right.
validate it, pressure test it. And it's interesting because, most people grow up within their discipline, right? Like they grow up within sales or they grow up within product. But, you know, even though you've been in customer success for such a long time, it seems like you've adopted so many methodologies from around the business. I imagine that comes from just working within a startup and, um, you know, just working with so many different leaders and understanding their philosophies and ways of working.
I think also just spending enough time focusing on what works and what doesn't. I
Right.
think so much of the
Learning
time
lessons.
we're not focused on actually measuring the impact of the activities and the work that we're doing, that
Yeah.
we decide we're going to design something, we roll it out, we do all the change management, great. And then we're on to the next thing.
Correct.
And
Just
it's like,
keep it
well,
moving.
did that thing we did a year ago, did that work? But we did 100 other things alongside of that. So now we can't even understand what drove what impact. And I feel like that's just, unfortunately how a lot of people are building out their business.
Yeah. How do you push an org to do that, right? And develop that habit of continuous learning or retrospecting.
One thing at a time. And nobody likes that. Nobody likes that. But I'm not also
No.
saying not one thing at a time for a year. Give me one thing at a time for 3 weeks. Let's get enough of a scientifically relevant sample size, whatever that looks like, and actually just validate that something works. Like, give me a small sample and a period of time. I'm big on trial. Listen, I have failed huge, like in big, massive ways in my career. I don't want to do that anymore. So, like, can we
Right.
fail in like small little bite-sized pieces,
Yep.
and then pivot? So that's my problem with folks is that everyone decides that we have this great idea and this big audacious goal and we're going to go roll out this whole big thing. We do so much work and then it doesn't work the way we thought it would. And now we've got to wind something back, undo all these things. No, pick one person, pick 5 customers, go try the thing. We've got to be agile. We have to be flexible and be able to do these things quick and test. And it doesn't need to be perfect. We over engineer everything.
Always.
Oh my
Always.
God, the
And stick
processes
to
I've
the
seen built
plan.
out. I'm like, ugh, go away.
Stick to the plan forever, and it may or may not work out. On to the next massive thing. 100%. I'm curious, Kristi, you have gained such recognition for this approach, which in itself is just like, adaptable, flexible, um, a sort of agile mindset in general. And you've built this wonderful, strong personal brand, and it resonates with so many people in the industry. I'm curious if you're going to take this show on the road outside of tech, if it's something that you've thought about.
While I am a planner, I probably keep my plans a little bit more close to chest. So I'm going to say I would love to continue to educate, enable the space. And so whatever capacity my career affords me to do that, I will continue to do that. I think right now my big thing is just this idea of selfless giving. And I'm
Mhm.
committed to that. And I'll do that every day in the forums and in the spaces where I have a platform to do so. Um, I think that there's something for us all to be learning from and growing from. And so I think something I didn't have when I was growing up in customer success and in SaaS was access to resources and people. I didn't
Yeah.
have information. I didn't have best practices. I didn't have people I could go to. And so I always made a commitment that if I was ever in a position to prevent somebody else from having the same experiences I had, I would do that. And so I feel like that has been my objective and that'll continue to be what drives me forward. And hopefully that allows me to do something bigger with it in the future. But for right now, I got to get through the end of the year.
Kristi, I've learned so much from you in this short amount of time. I'm super grateful for you jumping on and talking with us today. Before we wrap, I wanted to get a little bit more from you. Do you have any last minute advice to give to anybody who's looking at customer experience and building anything out, or like a favorite book that's impacted your career that you could share with the audience?
Oh, okay. So I've got two, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and then I think Atomic Habits. And I would say Atomic Habits has probably shaped me as an entire person more than any other book. Like I'm somebody who runs my day very, very structured. From I get up at 4:05 every day, not 4 o'clock, not 4:10, 4:05. There's very specific reasons for this. 4:05 every day. I'm working out first thing in the morning. I'm wrapping up by 6:15 every day. I get my daughter's lunch packed. I get her off to school. I get showered, hair, makeup done, dressed, sitting at my desk by 8:45. This is my routine. I mean, bed is made, kitchen is clean, candles are burning. Every single thing that I do every single day is part of a routine that I have built to help me accomplish goals. And so I mean, that book probably spoke to me in ways that I didn't know that I needed to hear, but creating small habits personally and professionally are going to help you be more successful than you ever thought you could be. So I like a lot of books. I'm going to say if I had to pick just one, it's probably going to be Atomic Habits.
I love that. I'm gonna have to add it to my reading list.
Oh gosh, if you haven't read it, I think you'll love it. It sounds like from what we've chatted about that it'll actually probably support a lifestyle that you've already designed for yourself.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Kristi.
Thank you guys so much. This was a great conversation. I appreciate the time.